So if you've been around since the beginning, you'll know that the first video I ever did for this channel was for a little game called Assault Spy. The video was badly paced, had terrible audio quality, editing had some really bad mistakes, and everything was just kind of all over the place. But the game itself is a really cool indie character action game that takes a lot of inspiration from Devil May Cry. It was a sort of adaptation of a very obscure visual novel and was developed by a single person known as Wazn. Overall, it was a bit loose and a little bit unpolished, but it was still an incredibly fun game that had tons of content for such a small scope. It also goes for dirt cheap in most Steam sales these days, so I fully recommend giving it a try. For today though, we're going to be talking about the developer's new game that I've been eagerly awaiting ever since I first saw some alpha test footage on Wazn's Twitter. A hectic, dynamic superhero action game that is showing a lot of promise and sporting much higher production values than Assault Spy. Its 3D models looking significantly nicer, losing that sort of plasticky feel that Assault Spy originally had. And there's now a whole slew of visual effects and artistic choices that really pop and stand out. Now, from a first glance, it may seem like the game is very similar to Gravity Rush, as both games have you soar through the air, landing kicks and other blows, and launching your enemies into the distance. And the similarities are certainly there, but Mightreya still possesses those character action game design philosophies of Assault Spy. The game consists of a good deal more than just spamming the same gravity kick over and over and occasionally using a super. Not to throw shade at Gravity Rush, but its combat is not the reason why I like that game. Mightreya's combat revolves around putting enemies into not-bat states and managing your resources effectively and efficiently to deal with those enemies as best you can, all the while varying up your attacks to increase that style meter, but also your damage, as using the same move over and over will actually nerf you. Something that's not really presented in the demo but has various dev posts and trailers talking about it is the main story hook of the game, with Rhea getting these superpowers and using them to protect the city, but relying on her friend Neo to film and livestream everything to get viewers and money rolling in to support this whole superhero gig. And this is a very funny way of trying to tie that DMC-like style meter into the game in a very natural way that makes sense within the context of the story, where you're not always trying to be as efficient as possible with taking down your enemies, but instead going full kayfabe and playing up to the crowd in order to keep going. Unlike your typical character action game, however, while the combat does feel incredibly weighty and satisfying with every hit having tons of visceral impact behind them, the game kinda lets you get away with being incredibly mashy if you want to be. Everything builds around 3 main attack buttons: your basic combo fodder attacks for dealing damage and building up your EX meter, your big heavy finisher moves which can be performed by cashing out said EX meter, and your sub-weapon, which in the final game can be switched around with different weapons like a katana or such, but in the demo just acted like a little fireball Hadoken button. I found it very easy on my first run through the demo to just mash the basic attack button and occasionally hit those heavy attack finishers whenever I felt like it, and ended up doing pretty well despite having no clue what I was bloody doing. Now, I know it's an early access demo, so they're not going to be throwing the hardest things possible at you, but the depth of the game, at least as it currently stands right now, is very reliant on the player themselves putting in the work to engage in that self-expression combo making for it to be really fun and engaging. Which, to be fair, is par for the course for this type of game, but with the player being able to get away with so much compared to its contemporaries, which are usually pretty difficult and at least ask the player to learn the combat system to some degree, I feel like there's a good chance that the average player of Mightreya might end up walking away without even realizing that they weren't using half of the things that they could have been. Granted, as of the current demo, there's no real tutorial to explain how the combat precisely works, and no upgrade system to actually spend that currency on to be able to give you hints to what you could unlock. So I imagine this small gripe is actually not going to be an issue when the game properly releases. For now, we just have to rely on a post within the developer's Discord group to be able to know what's going on. So for the sake of understanding and helping to make it easier for you if you do intend to play the beta test, I'll give you a simple breakdown of the demo's entire toolset. Your standard attack is affected by 3 different things: the distance from your auto-locked on enemy, the length you've held the button down for, and whether or not you've performed an action just before attacking, whether that be a jump, a dive, or a dash. Jumping before the attack will give you a launcher, whilst diving will give you a spike. Holding down the button will give you some sort of a strong combo string of attacks or a large knockback move. And just like Assault Spy, there's even a just frame delay combo if you really want to maximize the damage on your basic attacks. Even in this beta state, there is actually a pretty long list of different attacks that you can use. However, due to the hecticness of combat, a lot of these moves can blend together, and this is where the combat can feel a little bit mashy if you let it. The main purpose of these attacks is to build up your EX meter, signified by these blue pips, and they can be cashed out to perform your heavy Atma attacks, where Rhea will summon a giant fist to slam into the enemy, and it can be used by itself for 1 pip, or you can charge it up and use multiple at once. These moves easily do the most damage and build up the most style meter, and are very obviously designed to be your combo finishers. The final part of the core combat, at least in the demo, was the sub-weapon, which acts as this sort of dinky little projectile, but also had a unique attack if you used it immediately after knocking an enemy away, having Rhea send a sort of shotgun blast to chase them down Dragon Ball Z style. Doing this with the charged variant actually costs a pip from the EX meter, but does give some suitably flashy results. Outside of these things, however, you have things like a snatch grapple for pulling enemies towards you, a cinematic finisher you can perform on weaker foes, and a super meter that you can spend on a big powerful screen nuke or a powered up state if you think you can be more efficient with it. There's also a perfect dodge, complete with a high damage counter, and even a high risk, high reward parry that's activated by moving towards the enemy at the moment of impact a la Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, that if you pull off successfully, you'll get an extra pip to your EX meter. And finally, if you pair the grapple with a slam, which you can perform by using a dive and a heavy attack together, you can grab the enemy ready to throw at another. For an early demo build, it's showing a lot of promise, but that is definitely what it is, a demo build. The production value is significantly higher than Assault Spy, but the polish is obviously not there yet. And the demo's just missing quite a few features as well, such as any way to actually spend any of the currency that you earn, as well as stuff like voice acting, a proper look at the story, and anything much beyond the short test level and boss that you can play. What I'm saying is, if this video has piqued your interest, don't go out and download the test build expecting the world from a game that's still cooking. The combat, as of right now, is a little bit rough around the edges, but if there's one thing this game does well, is having style. One thing that I do think is really cool is Rhea's friend Neo is filming the whole thing, and this is actually represented as a live stream camera feed in the top right hand corner, showing you various shots from different angles. It can be a little bit janky as she can get caught on things, but the idea in of itself is really cool. And I think a no-brainer decision and something I'd love to see is a sort of highlight reel at the end of each mission using these camera angles to show you what you did. Not to mention being able to do things like taunt and pose for the camera to be able to build up more style points. Because realistically, while it is really cool in gameplay, it's not exactly something you can easily look at while you're fighting. But yeah, this is a really cool game that I really recommend that you give a try. The playtest is free and only really about 20, 30, 40 minutes long, and with Assault Spy, the pedigree behind the developer itself is really good. If you've not got that game either, then I absolutely recommend picking it up on sale. It's dirt cheap and really fun.